Next reading is understanding business cycles. EOC questions, that's end of chapter questions extracted from your CFA level 1 curriculum. First question. The characteristic business cycle patterns of trough, expansion, peak and contraction are periodic. Well, it doesn't mean that they repeat after a similar duration. Yes, they recur, but there is no periodicity or similar duration. The stages of the business cycle, trough, expansion, peak and contraction, they are repeated over time. So that's, yes, they recur, but saying that they are periodic or they repeat after similar duration, this is incorrect. So that makes B to be the correct option. During the contraction phase of a business cycle, it is most likely that inflation indicators are stable. Wrong. If it's contraction, we would see disinflation or deflation. So it's not that the indicators are stable, so they might be trending downwards. Aggregate economic activity is decreasing. That's true. During contraction phase, aggregate economic activity decreases. Investor preference for government securities decline. Wrong. Rather, it increases. It provides them the added safety. So this is incorrect. So only the option that should be marked is B. An economic peak is most closely associated with accelerating inflation. Correct. That's what we discussed in our overview. Accelerating inflation, this is what we would witness at an economic peak. So look no further. This is quite rather stable or increasing capital spending. Based on typical labor utilization patterns across the business cycle, productivity, that is the output per worker hours, is most likely to be the highest where? Now this is an interesting question. Normally that's what we would expect. Peak of a boom. Not necessarily. Look carefully. When the business is undergoing trough, recession, firm will try to minimize their costs. They will resort to what you call the lean production, minimization of waste, minimization of cost, to generate maximum output with as little input or as little workers as possible. So basically this would be at the bottom of recession. We would like to make maximum out of the available resources. So that's more likely here in C, not at A. Next. As the expansion phase of the business cycle advances from early stage to the late stage, businesses most likely experience a decrease in labor cost would increase. Wrong. Capital investment will increase. Wrong. What we will feel and what we'll face is the availability of qualified workers. That's what is going to decrease. That's what we will experience a decrease in. Because most of the people, the qualified workers, they would be employed. So the availability of qualified workers would decrease. That is the right option, C. An analyst writes in an economic report that the current phase of business cycle is characterized by accelerating inflationary pressures. Of course, we're talking about expansion. And borrowing by companies. The analyst is most likely referring to not contraction, rather we are talking about the peak of business cycle. Because accelerating inflation is one of the features of rapidly expanding economy. Capital expenditures will increase. So during such times, many business finance their capital expenditure with debt to expand their productive capacity. So this is true. A is the right option. In a recession, in an economic downturn, companies are most likely to adjust their stock of physical capital by, remember we are in recession, selling it at fire sale prices. Well, not selling it at a fire sale price. You might need it in the future. You just can't sell the assets away. Maybe it's just temporary. We will pass this period and there will be economic recovery. So what you might do is not maintaining equipment. Maintenance expenses are reduced. Quickly cancelling orders for new construction equipment. Well, I would say cancelling. You might delay or postpone the investment in capital expenditure. So this is not appropriate. Well, yes, not maintaining equipment. That's what is most likely. Physical capital adjustment to an economic downturn might result in some maybe less money being spent on maintaining equipment. That makes B to be the correct option. The inventory to sales ratio is most likely to be rising where? First, you need to see the composition of the formula. It's inventory upon sales. So when this ratio would increase, when you will have a bigger denominator and an exceedingly smaller denominator. So when will it happen? Yes, it will happen near the top of an economic cycle. Sales begin to slow down before production is cut, so leading to an increased level of unsold stock. So this would result in higher ratio. So this would be C. Next. The Austrian Economic School attributes the primary cause of business cycle to misguided government intervention. This is clearly what we discussed in our reading overview, understanding business cycles. So it's just simply a textbook based question. If you have read the theory well, you would know that it's A. Moving on. Austrian economists see monetary policy mistakes as leading to booms and busts. Alright. Next. A decrease in country's total imports is most likely caused by an increase in the pace of domestic GDP growth. Well, this would result in higher income levels and that would result in higher imports, not lower. Incorrect. A cyclical downturn in the economies of primary trading partners. Well, for us, we might find the prices attractive, so this might result in more being imported. Persistent currency depreciation relative to primary trading partner. Yes, if our currency depreciates, our exports would look good to the foreign buyers, but since now our currency is weaker, we will have to pay a lot of local currency to purchase the foreign currency and our imports will become expensive, hence they will fall. Look no further, it's C. Monetarists favor a limited role of the government because they argue that the government policy responses may lag. True. Monetarist caution policy effects can occur long after the need for which they were implemented is no longer an issue. So that's the right point. A is correct. The discouraged worker category is defined to include people who are overqualified for their job. How do we define discouraged worker? Discouraged workers are defined as persons who have stopped looking for work and are outside the labor force. So they could look for a job, but they choose not to. This is what you call a discouraged worker. So that's B. According to Austrian school, the most appropriate government response to an economic recession is to allow the market to adjust naturally. Yes, exactly. That's what their belief is, that the government should have limited intervention in the economy, and they say that this is the best thing to do in a recession and let the market adjustments take place on their own. Let's just not intervene the market. A national government responds to a severe recession by funding numerous infrastructure projects using deficit spending, government intervention, government increased spending. Which school of economic thought is most consistent with such action? Of course, Keynesian. Keynesian economists believe that government intervention is essential. The government should respond to a recession by using deficit spending to fund infrastructure projects. So that's A. According to real business cycle models, an economic contraction is most likely caused by, well, the real business cycle models, they have concluded that the expansions and contractions in an economy, they are caused by some external shocks, such as supply shock arising from advances in technology, or perhaps changes in the relative prices of inputs like energy prices. So in this case, rising energy prices, an increase in energy price could shift the short-run aggregate supply to the left, and this will result in higher prices and lower GDP. So that makes B to be the correct option. Next, question number 16. The unemployment rate is considered a lagging indicator because what is a lagging indicator? The lagging indicator is an indicator that is relatively slower in recession and recovery phase. So when there is an economic recession, so unemployment will rise but slowly. And when there is an economic recovery, so unemployment will fall but slowly. So that's why it lags. It is a lagging indicator. So businesses are slow to hire, and that's the reason. And fire due to related costs. So that makes it a lagging indicator. The category of persons who would be most likely to be harmed by an increase in the rate of inflation is a homeowner with fixed 30 years mortgage. He will benefit. If you have borrowed, you are making the payment, and if there is high inflation, so you are basically paying less than what you borrowed. So this is not what we are looking for. Looking for the one that results in a harm. A retiree relying on a fixed annuity payment, yes. So what he will be receiving in the future will be worth less because of inflation. So he will be the one who will be harmed. Workers employed under contract with escalator clauses. Well, they don't have to be worried. Their salaries will be adjusted for inflation. So they're not harmed. They are covered. So that makes B to be the correct option. With inflation, fixed amount of money buys fewer goods and services, thus reducing the purchasing power. So these guys, retirees on fixed annuity payment, they will be the losers. Next, question number 18. A decrease in both the labor force participation ratio and the unemployment rate. So labor force participation ratio is decreasing and unemployment rate is decreasing, is most likely caused by labor force participation ratio is decreasing. So people are not willing to work. So it appears that discouraged workers, they are not interested in jobs anymore. So they don't want to work. So they are leaving the pool of labor force. So this would mean an unemployment rate is also decreasing, which means that people are just leaving out of the pool of workers. So an increase in discouraged workers. So increase in discouraged worker means there is a decrease in labor force, and this would mean the less participation, labor force participation, and decrease in unemployment. So straightforward question, A is the right answer. The term that describes when inflation declines but nonetheless remains positive, we call this disinflation. Deflation is the negative inflation. Disinflation is that when the inflation falls from maybe 10% to maybe 8%, so the inflation is still positive, but the rate of growth in prices has decreased. This is called disinflation, right? So disinflation basically is the reduction of inflation from a higher percentage to a low percentage, but still above zero. But when it is negative, then we call it deflation. And stagflation we have discussed in our previous were reading. During an economic recovery, a lagging unemployment rate is most likely attributed to, but the question is saying that there is economic recovery, so the unemployment rate should fall, but it hasn't yet fallen. Still the unemployment rate is high. Why would it be? The reason is that when the economy recovers, new job seekers would enter the labor force, because since they have just entered the job market, so they won't find work immediately, right? So this is the reason that your unemployment rate basically first increase and then later it will fall. Okay, next, that was B. Okay, the treasury manager of a large company has recently left his position to accept a promotion with the competitor 6 months from now. A statistical employment survey conducted now should categorize the status of the former treasury manager as, see, the time lag between when you leave one job and join the another, this time gap for which you were unemployed is what you call that you were being frictionally unemployed. This is what we have discussed earlier. So basically, frictionally unemployed people are not working at the time of employment, but they have recently left one job and they are about to join another job. So the time gap between this, for which they were not employed, such an unemployment is called frictional unemployment. Next, deflation is most likely be associated with A. Shortage of government revenues. No. Substantial macroeconomic contraction. Exactly. Deflation is a part of business cycle, and this is because of reduced spending and higher level of unemployment, so that would result in significant, substantial macroeconomic contraction. So this is a very serious situation for a country, for having negative inflation when the prices are falling. Why? Because spendings are reduced and there is higher unemployment, people do not have the money to spend, and the economy is in trouble. Next, the least likely consequence of period of hyperinflation. Mind the word least likely. Possibility of social unrest. Yes, this is likely. Increased supply of money. Absolutely, this is likely. Reduced velocity of money. Incorrect. Reduced velocity of money cannot happen in hyperinflation. People will spend their money as quickly as possible so as to beat the price increase. So rather, it would be increased velocity of money. Money circulates more rapidly. So this is least likely and hence our correct option. Okay, now the question 24 and 25 is based upon this information. What we have is consumption baskets and price over 2 months. We have sugar, cotton, 70 kg, 60 kg, and the prices are given for November 2010 and December 2010. Sugar quantity and prices are given respectively. So what are we doing? Assuming the base period for 2010 consumption is November and the initial price index is set as 100, then the inflation rate after calculating the December price index as per the Lespier's index. Okay, so I'm sure you would know, for Lespier's index we take Q0 P0 versus Q0 P1, right? So if you calculate 70 times 0.9 plus 60 times 0.6, right, the consumption bundle for November would be $99. Same quantities for the base year, 70 times 1, 60 times 0.8, and if you add, it will be 118. Right? Okay, now let's calculate the index. 118 upon 99 times 100, it will give you 119.19, which if compared with the base price index of 100, it will give you the inflation figure of 19.19, which is close to 19.2. So that would make A to be the correct option. Next, same set of data, but this time we need Parshas index. For the December consumption basket in Exhibit 1, the value of the Parshas index is closest to. Basically, Qn Pn upon Qn P0, right? So what you're going to do, 120 times 1 plus 50 times 0.8 upon 120 times the previous price 0.9 plus 50 times 0.6, and if you simplify, this is going to be 160 by 138, and it's going to be 115.9, which is approximately 1/16, and A is the answer. Next, the central bank will most likely allow the economy to self-correct in the period of high inflation, fast economic growth, and low unemployment. So here the central bank can intervene, influence the market through money supply and the interest rates. Low inflation, slow economic growth, and high unemployment. Here again the impetus would be needed to stimulate the economy. So government through short-term influence in the money market and interest rate, the central bank can have the influence. But here, high inflation, slow economic growth, and high unemployment. This is a situation that is very serious. This is stagflation. So here the economy is likely to be left to self-correct because there is no short-term economic policy that is thought to be effective here. So that makes C to be the correct option. Disinflation is best described as, we discussed this a little while ago, disinflation is the decline in the inflation rate. Prices are still positive. This is deflation, decline in price level, negative inflation rate. That's deflation. So disinflation is the reduction in the inflation rate, maybe from 10% to maybe 8%. That makes C to be the correct option. Next, the characteristic of National Consumer Price Index, which is most typically shared across major economies worldwide, is the geographic area covered in their survey. Basically, central banks, they use consumer price index to monitor the inflation and accordingly evaluate their monetary policies. So not for a particular geographical area, the weights they place on the covered goods, their use is in the determination of macroeconomic policy. That's the main objective. Of the following statements regarding the producer's price index, which is least likely? The PPI can influence the future CPI. Yes, it does. Categories weights can vary more widely than similar CPI. Correct. Is used more frequently than CPI as a benchmark for adjusting labor contract payments. This is incorrect. Basically, CPI is used for this purpose, whereas PPI is more closely connected to business contracts. So this is incorrect, least likely. Okay, a bigger question now. The following represents selected commodity price data for July-August 2015. Milk, orange, these are the quantities and the prices for August 2015, quantity and the prices. Given the consumption basket and the price presented, which type of price index will result in the highest calculated inflation rate over a 2-month period? So this is a good question, and I would refer to the solution straight away. The computation will be taking a lot of space here, which is not available. So let us go straight there. What we will do, first we will calculate the Lesper index based upon the previous question. We have solved a question previously for Lesper index, and this is the inflation rate as per Lesper index. Then we will calculate based upon the current consumption basket, that's the Parshas index, and this is the inflation rate as per the Parshas index. And then in the Fisher index, we simply combine the Parshas and Lesper index to get the inflation rate as 8.99. So what we have is the inflation rate under Parshas, Lesper, and Fisher. Amongst them, this is the highest, and of course we know Lesper index is based upon the constant consumption basket, whereas the Parshes index is using the current consumption basket, and Fisher uses a chain method, that is the inflation rate calculated by chaining the monthly price of consumption basket as they change over time. Fisher, where we just simply multiply the Lesper's and Parshes and then we take the square root. So the highest among them is 10%. Basically, that is the use of constant consumption basket, Lesper. Next. The inflation rate most likely relied on to determine public economic policy. For public economic policy, we take core inflation. Why? Because it is less volatile. It excludes food and energy prices, so therefore it will not be as likely to lead to policy overreactions when serving as a target. So this is the right option. A is the right option. What is most important effect of labor productivity in cost push inflation scenario? Cost push inflation means when the cost of production goes up, this will feed into the higher prices and the prices of the goods go up. So what is the most important effect of labor productivity in a cost push inflation? Of course, when labor becomes more productive, workers can produce more output per hour. So this means they can increase output at a faster rate than the increase in wage rise. So this basically would mean that the business cost will tend to be low and it will result in less impact upon cost push inflation. So as productivity grows proportionally exceeds wage increase, product price increase are less likely. Which of the following statement is best description of the characteristic of economic indicators? Leading indicators are important because they track the entire economy. Well, no such indicators exist that track the entire economy. We use a combination of some leading, lagging, and some simultaneous indicators. So lagging indicators is measuring past conditions, do not require revision. They do require revision. A combination of leading and coincident indicators can offer effective forecast. Correct. This is the right option. There is no single indicator that we can consider as definitive, so we rather use a mix of them, so which can be affected by various economic determinants. So this is the right combination. Leading and coincident indicators, they can offer an effective forecast. A product is part of a price index based on fixed consumption basket. If over time the product's quality improves while its price stays constant, the measured inflation is most likely be, well, as the quality of the product improves, it will satisfy people's needs and wants better. So the measured inflation rate is relatively higher in this case, otherwise than if no adjustment has been made. So even if the good price had increased over time, the improvements in quality would still bias the measured inflation rate upward. A price index of goods and services that excludes food and energy is most likely used to calculate core inflation. Correct. That's what we've discussed previously. That's what we use in policy decision making. Food and energy inflation is excluded. We take core inflation. When the spread between 10 years US Treasury yields and the federal funds rate narrow, and at the same time the prime rate stays unchanged, this mix of indicators most likely forecast future economic decline. Because when the spreads narrow down, this is a leading indicator that tells us that there is going to be a drop in short-term rates and a fall in economic activity. So in this case, the prime rate will be a little slow. So basically it lags. So it turns after the economy turns. So that makes B to be the correct option. Next. Which of the following economic developments is most likely to cause cost push inflation? Industrial capacity utilization rises to very high level. Well, that will reduce the cost of production. Labor productivity increases faster than hourly labor cost. That will reduce the cost, so it will result in lower cost, hence not a cost push inflation. Here, in fact, the costs are decreasing in A and B. A shortage of trained workers emerges throughout the economy. Workers are in short supply, so their wage rate will be pushed upward. So this increase in the wage would feed into the cost of production, hence it will result in cost push inflation. Hence C is the right option. An economist expects the following. Decline in the unemployment rate will result in higher revenues for the home retailers. Good. A tighter labor market will put upward pressure on wages, compelling home retailers to raise prices. Look at this. We see an upward push on the price because of the increase in the wage rate, and this is what you call the cost push inflation. So this is a situation that is referring to rising cost, hence the higher prices, cost push inflation. Next, if relative to prior values of their respective indicators, the inventory sales ratio has risen, unit labor cost is stable, and real personal income has decreased, it is most likely that the peak in the business cycle has occurred, or is just about to occur, or will occur sometimes in the future. This is interesting. Remember, the sales, inventory to sales ratio and the labor cost, they are typically lagging indicators. And we have an indicator that we call the coincidental indicator. The real personal income has decreased. Real personal income is a coincidental indicator, and this decrease itself indicates that now there is a slowdown in business activity. It is most likely the peak in the business has occurred. Now we are running towards a business slowdown. Current economic statistics indicating little change in service inflation. Well, the service inflation is showing no change. This is basically a lagging indicator, so it's neither positive or negative, so it is not helping us to determine whether the economy is in an upturn or downturn. Next is the rising residential building permits. Now this is an indication, this is a leading indicator. Rising building permits, a leading indicator, indicates that there is an upturn. Upturn is expected to occur, or if it is there, it is going to continue. And then the next one, the increasing average duration of unemployment. This one is a lagging indicator. It will be slow to act. Right now, this leading indicator tells us that the economy is witnessing an upturn. So there is an evidence that the cyclical upturn is expected to occur in the future, and that makes B to be the correct option. Next, when aggregate real personal income, industrial output, and S&P 500 index all increase in a given period, it is most accurate to conclude that the cyclical upturn is personal income and industrial output. They are coincidental indicators, and S&P 500 is a leading indicator, and they are both and all pointing towards the upturn. So this is an evidence that there is a cyclical upturn that is occurring. That makes A to be the correct option. Which of the following is most likely to increase after an increase in aggregate real personal income? When the aggregate real personal income increase in personal income, aggregate real personal income, it's a coincidental indicator. Equity prices, it's a leading indicator. Building permits for new private housing units, discussed in the previous question, it's a leading indicator. So what will happen after the increase in the aggregate real personal income? The lagging indicator, that will delay a bit, the ratio of consumer installment debt to income. This is a lagging indicator. So this will happen first, coincident indicator, and then this will rise later. So which of the following is most likely to increase after an increase in aggregate real personal income? This followed by this. That makes C to be the correct option. Which of the following indicator is most appropriate in predicting a turning point in the economy? Industrial production, it's a coincidental indicator. Average bank prime rate, lending rate, that's a lagging indicator. and average weekly hours of manufacturing in anticipation of demand, this is a leading indicator. So the question was, which of the following indicators is most appropriate in predicting the turning point in the economy? This, the leading one, they'll guide. So that makes C to be the correct option. And that ends your questions on understanding business cycles.